Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into a real head-scratcher today. One of those mysteries that just keeps you up at night. The Zodiac Killer.
Yeah, this one's a classic for sure.
We'll be digging into everything. Netflix documentaries, articles, the whole nine yards.
It's funny. I actually just finished. This is the Zodiac speaking on Netflix.
Yeah.
Really creepy stuff.
Oh, yeah. I read that one article, what was it called? The Case Breakers? The one where they claim to have, cracked one of the ciphers.
I think I thought something about that too. A lot of folks think that Gary Francis' post was the Zodiac. Wild, right?
It is. So, for those not totally familiar, the Zodiac was active in Northern California back in the late 60s, early 70s.
Right, a time of, what, like free love and all that? Hard to imagine such darkness amidst all that, huh?
Seriously, he's confirmed to have killed at least 5 people, but claimed way more, like 37. Sent these terrifying letters to the newspapers, taunting everyone.
Yeah, the ciphers. Always trying to be one step ahead. I guess that's what makes this case so, well, fascinating, right?
Totally. All right, let's rewind to the beginning. The first victims, Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday, just high school kids.
First date, too. Parked on Lake Herman Road, December 68. Brutal.
A few months later, he attacks again. Darlene Ferrin and Michael Mageau, this time in Vallejo.
Ferrin was killed, but Mageau, luckily, he survived, even gave a description of the attacker.
But there's this chilling detail.
Oh, right, the phone call. He called the police himself, like, right after, admitted to both attacks.
The nerve. It's like he needed everyone to know it was him.
I guess in his mind, it was all part of the performance, you know?
Then, September 69, we have Cecilia Shepard and Brian Hartnell attacked at Lake Berryessa.
This time, the Zodiac was wearing a hooded costume, that whole symbol thing. Shepard didn't make it, but Hartnell lived.
And he called the police again, right? Like some sick game.
Yep. Makes you think about what kind of person could do something like that, then just casually call it in.
All right, fast forward to October 69, San Francisco. Paul Stein, a taxi driver.
Shot and killed. But here's where it gets even more disturbing. He sends a piece of Stein's shirt to the San Francisco Chronicle, soaked in blood.
Along with another letter. Classic Zodiac move.
Like he was signing his work. Pure evil.
Then things get weird. We jump to 1973. A letter pops up at a newspaper all the way in Albany, New York.
The Albany Times-Union. They get this letter, August 1st, filled with threats and those familiar coded symbols.
Claims he's alive and well and gonna start killing again. Even gives a date and time for the next attack.
The FBI tried everything, couldn't crack those codes.
And thankfully, no crimes matching the letter were ever found.
So, hoax. Copycat. Or was the Zodiac really thinking about expanding his territory?
No one knows for sure, but it just adds to the mystery, you know? This guy, whoever he was good at keeping people guessing.
Absolutely. So with all these attacks, these letters, these ciphers, the big question, of course, is who was Hugh?
Right, like who was the face behind the mask?
Well, there's one suspect that always comes up. Let's talk about Arthur Leigh Allen. This is the Zodiac speaking. That Netflix doc lays out a pretty compelling argument for him.
And the Seawater family, they knew him personally, right?
Mm-hmm.
Their stories are just unsettling, to say the least.
To put it mildly, yeah. They claim that before any of the murders, Allen would take them to places that would later become crime scenes. Think about that.
As a parent, it's just horrifying. It adds a whole new layer of, premeditation.
Exactly, like he was scouting locations, familiarizing himself.
Plus, Allen himself, a former teacher, convicted sex offender, he fit a certain profile.
And there was the watch, that Zodiac branded watch, found in his home after his death.
But here's the thing, never officially charged.
Right. Despite all that circumstantial stuff, nothing concrete enough to pin it on him.
So what do you think? Was Allen the Zodiac? Or is there more to the story?
It's a question that's haunted investigators for years. The Seawater family's stories are powerful, no doubt, and there are these details that just seem to line up. But without that definitive proof, that smoking gun,
It's like trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing. You might see a shape, but you can't be sure of the whole picture.
Exactly, and it doesn't end there. Allen's just one of many suspects linked to the Zodiac.
Oh, right. Like that multiple killer theory? Didn't that come from Myth of the Zodiac Killer, that Peacock docuseries?
That's the one. They argue that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't just one person. The handwriting, eyewitness accounts, even the way the attacks were spread out, it all points to the possibility of multiple people working together.
Wow. That's a lot to wrap your head around. So if it wasn't Allen, and maybe not just one person, who else are we looking at?
Well, there's one name that's been making headlines recently, Gary Francis' post.
Right. That was the guy the case breakers were talking about, the one they say the cipher points to.
Exactly. They're former law enforcement, forensic experts, the whole deal. They say those scars on Post's forehead match the Zodiac sketches. Plus, they think he committed a sixth murder that was never linked to the Zodiac.
Chorizo Bates, right. This was
Right.
back in 66, wasn't it?
Right. The case breakers think they found connections between her and Post, photographs, a weird note at the crime scene.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But got to take that with a grain of salt. Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's all pretty intriguing, but no official confirmation from law enforcement yet.
Speaking of needing more evidence, what about that Earl Van Best Jr. guy? Wasn't his own son the one who pointed the finger at him?
Yeah, that's right. But it was mostly circumstantial evidence, and his son has some, well, a history of mental health issues.
So not the most reliable source then.
Not necessarily. There are some similarities, like with the handwriting, and he did live in the Bay Area when the murders were happening, but nothing solid to tie him directly to the crimes. It's just like...
One giant puzzle with a bunch of pieces that don't quite fit.
Exactly. And just when you think you might be getting close to figuring it out, another curveball comes along. Like that whole incident with Kathleen Johns and her baby.
Oh man, that one's just terrifying. Driving at night, a guy stops her, says her wheel's loose, but it turns out he's the one who messed with it.
Yeah, just to get her in his car. Drove them around for hours, threatening to hurt her baby.
Thankfully, she managed to jump out of the car with her daughter and escape. But the Zodiac, in one of his letters, actually bragged about giving a woman and her child a rather interesting ride.
Chilling, right. Whether or not it was officially connected to the Zodiac, it shows how random his attacks could be. It wasn't just couples, it was anyone, anytime.
It really messes with your head, you know? Like, how do you
Yeah.
even begin to understand someone like that?
That's the million-dollar question. We can analyze all the evidence we want, but there's this psychological piece that's always missing.
It's like trying to catch a shadow, right? It's always just out of reach.
Well said. You know, that movie Zodiac from 2007 with Jake Gyllenhaal and Robert Downey Jr., it really captured that obsessive feeling, that desperate need to find answers, even when they seem impossible to find.
Oh, yeah, great film. It's less about the murders themselves and more about how the case just consumes everyone involved.
Totally.
Yeah.
Journalists, investigators, everyone gets caught in the web.
Speaking of finding answers, didn't they finally crack one of those ciphers back in 2020? The 340 cipher, I think it was. Remember that?
I do. Huge news at the time. Everyone thought it was the key, you know, like, finally, we'll know who this guy is.
But
Letdown. Turned out to be a bunch of random words, taunts, nothing that revealed his identity.
figures. Even in code, he couldn't resist messing with everyone.
It almost makes you think he wanted it to stay a mystery, you know, like he was saying, you'll never catch me.
Creepy. But through all of this, it's important to remember the victims. Their stories, they shouldn't get lost in the whole whodunit aspect.
Absolutely. These were real people with families, with lives cut tragically short. We can't forget that. It's true. It's easy to get lost in the puzzle, the chase, and forget about the real human cost.
Exactly. So we've got these possible suspects, all these theories, but despite decades of investigation, the Zodiac's true identity remains unknown. It's kind of mind-blowing, right? Like, how is that even possible?
Well, I think it speaks to a few things. First, forensic technology back then wasn't what it is today. Fingerprints, DNA analysis, it wasn't as advanced.
Right, so a lot of the evidence they had was, what, circumstantial, eyewitness accounts, stuff like that.
Exactly. Plus, the Zodiac, he was smart, deliberate. He knew how to cover his tracks, how to manipulate the media, how to control the narrative.
He really did play the whole mind game thing to perfection, didn't he?
He did. And that brings us to another fascinating aspect of this case. The enduring mystery. Even today, people are still trying to crack the code, so to speak.
Yeah, it's like a puzzle that people can't put down. There's always that chance, that hope that someone will find that one missing piece, that one clue that unlocks the whole thing.
Exactly. And that's what keeps this case alive. It keeps people coming back to it, trying to understand it, trying to find answers.
It's like we as humans, we have this deep-seated need to make sense of chaos, to find order in the midst of the unknown.
I think you're right. And with a case like this, where there are so many unanswered questions, so many loose ends, it almost becomes an obsession for some people.
Speaking of obsession, I've got to say, that 2007 film, Zodiac, it really captured that feeling. You know?
Oh, absolutely. Jake Gyllenhaal, Robert Downey Jr., they nailed it. That feeling of getting sucked into the case, the frustration, the determination, it's all there.
And it's a true story. Like, all that stuff actually happened.
Exactly. Which makes it even more unsettling, more real.
So after all this, after all the documentaries, the articles, the theories,
Yeah.
do you think we'll ever truly know who the Zodiac Killer was?
It's tough to say. There have been breakthroughs, like you mentioned, that cipher that was finally cracked in 2020.
Right, the 340 cipher. Big news at the time.
Mm.
But did it really get us any closer to solving the case?
Well, it added a piece to the puzzle, that's for sure. It gave us a glimpse into his mind, his thought process, his twisted sense of humor, but his identity, that remains elusive.
It's almost like he's still out there, somewhere, watching, waiting.
Yeah, that's a creepy thought, but honestly, it wouldn't surprise me.
So what's the takeaway here? What can we learn from a case like this, a case that might never be truly solved?
I think the Zodiac case teaches us a few things. First, it reminds us that evil exists, that there are people out there capable of terrible things.
That's a sobering thought.
It is.
Oh.
But it's also a reminder that even in the face of darkness, there's hope. People never gave up on this case. Investigators, journalists, everyday people, they kept searching, kept digging, kept pushing for answers.
And they still are, right?
They are. And who knows? Maybe one day someone will find that one piece of evidence, that one missing link, that finally closes the book on this case.
That would be amazing. But even if that never happens, even if the Zodiac's identity remains a mystery, I think the story itself, the story of the victims, the investigators, the tireless pursuit of justice, that's a story worth telling.
Absolutely. And it's a story that continues to fascinate and intrigue people to this day. It makes you wonder, what is it about unsolved mysteries that captures our imaginations so powerfully?
I think it's the unknown, the not knowing. It sparks our curiosity, makes us want to fill in the blanks, to make sense of the senseless.
I think you're onto something there. And when you have a case like this with a figure as enigmatic and as terrifying as the Zodiac Killer, well, it's no wonder that it continues to grip our collective consciousness.
It's a case that forces us to confront the darkness that exists in the world, but also to appreciate the resilience of the human spirit in the face of that darkness.
Well said.
You know, it's wild to think that even with all the advancements in technology, with DNA and all that, this case is still unsolved.
It really shows you how cunning he was, how careful. Like, even with all our modern tools, we're still trying to piece together a puzzle he created decades ago.
It's almost like he's winning, even from beyond the grave. Like, he got exactly what he wanted, this notoriety, this infamy.
It's disturbing, but yeah, there's a part of me that wonders if that was his goal all along, to create this myth, this legend that would outlive him.
And in a way, he succeeded. The Zodiac Killer, it's become more than just a name. It's like a symbol, a boogeyman almost.
Exactly. And that's the danger, right? We can't let the symbol overshadow the reality, the victims, the families, the pain he caused.
Right. It's important to remember that behind all the mystery, the intrigue, there were real people who lost their lives.
Absolutely. And investigators who dedicated their careers to trying to bring justice for those victims.
So where do we go from here? Do you think there's still hope that this case will be solved?
Honestly, I don't know. It wouldn't surprise me if some new evidence popped up, some DNA match, something that finally cracks the case wide open. But even if it doesn't, I think there's value in continuing to explore it.
What do you mean?
Well, studying these kinds of cases, even the unsolved ones, it can help us understand criminal behavior, the psychology of these kinds of offenders. It can inform how we approach investigations, how we protect ourselves.
That's a good point. It's not just about solving the mystery for the sake of solving it. There's real-world knowledge to be gained.
Exactly. And I think for the families of the victims, knowing that people still care, that people are still searching for answers, that can offer some sense of peace, some closure.
Yeah, I can only imagine how frustrating it must be to not have those answers, to not know for sure who took their loved ones from
It's
them.
got to be incredibly difficult. But even in the absence of those definitive answers, I think there's still room for hope.
Hope for what?
Hope that we'll continue to learn, to grow, to use the lessons from cases like this to prevent future tragedies. Hope that one day, maybe, justice will prevail, even if it comes decades too late.
Well said. Well, folks, that's about all the time we have for today's deep dive into the mystery of the Zodiac Killer.
Right.
We've covered a lot of ground, but I think it's safe to say this is a case that will continue to fascinate and haunt us for years to come.
It certainly will. And if you're interested in learning more, I highly recommend checking out that Netflix docuseries, This is the Zodiac Speaking.
Great recommendation. And of course, that 2007 film Zodiac is a must-watch if you want to really get inside the minds of the people who are obsessed with this case.
Absolutely. All right, everyone, until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, and as always, keep those lights on.
And maybe double-check your car wheels before you drive off. You never know who might be lurking in the shadows.